Just real quick, if you've been here before, you know I like to go over stats from last month. So let me just do a quick screen share and we'll get into that. Alrighty, hopefully you can see the screen now, right? CJ, if you could just give me a, okay, cool. And somebody else just came in. All right, so in the month of February, these are reports, okay? So it doesn't necessarily mean the event actually took place in February, but still, if you remember, this is some of the fun stuff you can do as well. Total of 232 in the United States and a bunch of representation throughout the world, with a total of 305 cases reported to us just in the month of February alone. And then as we go through, state by state, California, again, always at the top. Texas and Florida are neck and neck for number two spot. California's got about 10% of the total reports in the United States. And I believe that's because we have the most landmass combined with eyes to the skies because of great weather. But we also have probably the most military bases, I think, out of any state. I might be wrong on the military bases part, but the point is, a bunch of people looking up with a lot of military bases is why we get all the reports that we do. But it's fun to go through them. The shapes are, as usual, the circle is the top one. And, triangle jumped out at me this year or this month rather, and I don't know why. I'm working on a triangle case right now. And the person asked about like how common are they? And I said, well, they're not entirely common, actually. But this is on a global scale. But it piqued my interest to the point where I did a quick little look at the year 2025 just with triangles alone. And they're on average, let's say 20 or so triangles are reported every month throughout the world, with a total of 312 last year. I thought that was interesting, and I'm going to go back to the person I'm currently investigating for just to let them know it's a little bit more common than what I thought, but still a little bit on the rare side. And that is the stats for the month of February. Um, so I would like to, it's really a privilege actually to introduce our guest today, Mr. Michael Schratt. He's a private pilot and aviation historian who's been investigating UFO encounters for over 25 years. And so far, he has reviewed over 50,000 UFO cases. Um, Michael has appeared on multiple media platforms, including Coast to Coast AM, History Channel, Paranormal Matrix, UFO Hunters, and Fade to Black. And Michael's also been a guest speaker at multiple UFO conferences, including the Phoenix MUFON, International UFO Congress, the MUFON Symposium, UFO Con, etc., etc. So let's give a warm virtual welcome to Michael Schratt. And if it's now, floor is yours, sir.
Okay. Good to see everybody. Happy to be here. Thank you very much. And we're all a family here, so hopefully we'll have some surprises. We'll have some fun. I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll see if we can get this to work here. Share screen. Okay. Let's go here and share. So the title of this talk is Retrievals of the Third Kind, a pictorial history of recovered extraterrestrial craft, hardware, and bodies in military custody. And what this is this is a optimized, revised, and modified version of my previous retrievals lecture, but I've added a lot more information, updated the illustration, added more references, and this is an homage to Leonard Stringfield. Leonard Stringfield was the gentleman who coined the term UFO crash retrievals. So it's appropriate that we honor him and his legacy, because we're hearing a lot about legacy UAP crash retrieval programs almost every day now on a daily basis. There's something about UFO crashes going on, and you can't get around it. It's like everywhere now. Let me move on to the next slide here. And hopefully, is it tracking on your end? Is it moving to the next slide? Good. Okay. So UFO crash retrievals, the ultimate holy grail of UFO research. Now, why is it the ultimate holy grail of UFO research? It's fairly simple, because it's the crash retrievals that are going to be the vehicle that facilitates disclosure, because the crash retrievals have the bodies, the craft, and the debris. And that's what we need to take this field moving forward. Absolutely. We don't need any more CE1s or CE2s. What we need now is actual hardware and bodies. That's what we need to move this whole field forward. Let's continue on here. A couple of quick announcements. The content of each case in this presentation has remained intact per the description of the original source. The identity of first-hand sources will be protected per Leonard Stringfield's original agreement with his military contacts. The visual aids used in this presentation are computer-generated forensic composite illustrations and sketches which originated from specific details provided by Leonard's sources. So I want to give you where Leonard got this information. The caliber of military witnesses that Leonard interviewed and cataloged here. So it's 3-star U.S. Air Force generals, U.S. Air Force fighter pilots, astronauts, commercial pilots, air traffic controllers, neurosurgeons, pathologists, theoretical physicists and mathematicians, U.S. Army officers, U.S. Navy officers, military police, high-level Pentagon officials, top military brass, scientists and engineers who worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and other government facilities. So that just gives you a brief overview cross-section of the caliber of first-hand military witnesses that Leonard cataloged and compiled. We're talking about people who loaded craft onto 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboy trucks and shipped them to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. We've got doctors and pathologists that took tissue samples. That's the kind of people that we want for these cases here. Okay, a couple of other quick things. Number one, UFO crash retrievals can't be real because if they were, I would have read about it in a local newspaper. That's number one. Number two is there are not now nor ever have been any extraterrestrial visitors or equipment on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This is the Air Force official policy as of July 1980. So what we're going to do in this presentation is we're going to take the official Air Force policy. They don't have any bodies. They're telling us they don't have any debris. And we're going to go up against Leonard Stringfield's first-hand military witnesses. That's the whole point of this presentation here. This is the man of the hour. This is Leonard Stringfield. And over a 30-year time period, he cataloged dozens and dozens of these first-hand military witnesses that loaded craft, handled bodies, handled debris. That's the kind of people that Leonard dealt with here. And I want to go over a little bit of his biography. Who is Leonard Stringfield? He was born 1920. He grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. By the time he graduated from high school, he memorized the entire dictionary. This guy was a genius. They called him Webster. It's the perfect guy to be cataloging these comments and these cases. He joined the military as soon as he heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. During World War II, Leonard served in the intelligence service of the 5th Air Force in the Southwest Pacific Theater. He wrote 2 books, Inside Saucer Post 3-0 back in 1957, Situation Red, the UFO Siege, 1977. He served as director of the world's largest UFO research group in the mid-1950s, Civilian Research Interplanetary Flying Objects, and he received 8,000 letters in the first 2 weeks of existence. So in these early 50s timeframe, there was a huge interest in UFOs, UFO research. People were starving for knowledge, and he got thousands of letters, a tremendous amount of interest. This next bullet item is the one we want to talk about today here. His lecture on UFO crash retrievals at the 1978 MUFON Symposium in Dayton, Ohio, caused an international sensation. Now, why is that? That's what we want to ask here. Number one, the whole concept of UFO crash retrievals was a new entity back in 1978. Roswell was just coming onto the radar screen, so it was a new entity. Number two is when he gave his symposium proceeding at the MUFON Symposium in Dayton, Ohio, he was allowed to preserve an important part of our national history, but the names of his firsthand military witnesses had to be kept under wraps. And so there was pushback at the MUFON Symposium. There was no way to independently verify Leonard's witnesses because he had to keep the names under wraps. So there was understandably a lot of pushback. Leonard passed away December 18th, 1994. Now, there was one incident in Leonard's life that changed his entire trajectory. One instance, one event that changed his entire life. And that was this event right here. On August 30th, 1945, Leonard had a Foo Fighter sighting from inside a twin-engine C-46 while traveling from Okinawa to Iwo Jima. So here you see there were about 12 other pilots with him, and they saw at least 2 Foo Fighters kind of pull up next to their aircraft. One of the engines started conking out. They thought they were going to have to ditch into the ocean. But when this Foo Fighter peeled away, engine came back on, they landed safely. Let me hit you with another version of this thing. Here we've got Leonard looking out the window here of the C-46, and you can kind of imagine what this looked like. Go on to the next slide. So this is Newcastle Sun, January 3rd, 1945. Foo Fighters are latest. Pilots flying over Germany at night report that strange balls of fire are following them around on their missions. They have christened these strange phenomenon Foo Fighters. So here we've got Allied B-17s flying over Berlin. They're bombing the ball bearing factories and the oil refineries. And all of a sudden, these 3-foot diameter orange, yellow, white, orb, circular, sphere-shaped craft, they circle the B-17s and then they peel away. In many cases, these red orbs of light went right through the fuselage of the B-17. So this is in the European theater. Same thing happened with the B-24 Liberator pilots. The same thing happened to the B-29 pilots in the Pacific Theater. Now we move on to Cincinnati Enquirer, July 19th, 1993. It says, author continues quest for truth about UFOs. This would be the biggest thing since Christ, really. Well, that's a big statement, right? If even one of these cases is correct and can be proved to be extraterrestrial, then technically it would be the biggest thing since Christ. That's what we want to drill down on here in our presentation. Also want to make mention that at one time there were 22 bank boxes of letters, correspondence, address, telephone numbers, audio tapes, documentation regarding these military witnesses. This is the kind of information that needs to go into congressional hearings because we can track these people down and have them come forward in open congressional hearings. That's what we need to happen here. All right, so now let me take you to the Dayton Convention Center as it appeared back in July 1978. So we're going to walk inside the convention center. You can kind of get the idea. Leonard is walking in now. I'm going to take you inside. This is what it looked like when you get in. This is a cavernous area, and it was a groundbreaking historical day because the whole concept of crash retrievals was really a new entity. So here's Leonard giving his lecture at the MUFON Symposium at the Dayton Convention Center. And what he did, which was so historic, is he presented a paper. Because every time you have a MUFON Symposium, all the speakers have to submit their proceedings papers. Here is the front cover of the 1978 MUFON Symposium proceeding. And then this is the paper that Leonard presented. So it was retrievals of the third kind. He talked about 12 of his military firsthand witnesses. It's a rather lengthy paper, but it was groundbreaking. That was what sparked this whole lecture, the whole thing right here. Now, also want to mention everything that we'll be talking about today can be found in this book right here. UFO Crash Retrievals, The Complete Investigation Status Reports 1 through 7 by Leondard Stringfield. It gives you the dates, the locations, the times, where the crash retrieval took place, how many bodies were recovered, where the craft were transported. But the only problem with this book is, and it's very, text intensive, it's not for the faint of heart. You have to have a serious interest in this subject matter because there's no drawings, there's no sketches, there's no illustrations. It's devoid of any visual aids. So my thinking was, someone has to drill down on all the mission critical cases in this book, commit those to a refined drawing, use that as a guide or template to create a full color rendering to make these cases come alive. And over the last 5 years, this has been my crusade to preserve this important part of our national history. Another source is a book called Magic Eyes Only, Earth's Encounters with Extraterrestrial Technology by my good friend Ryan Wood. So within Leonard's publication, which is about $85 on Amazon, highly recommended, there's 119 crash retrieval cases. Within Magic Eyes Only by Ryan Wood, there's an additional 104 crash retrieval cases. So when you combine these now, we've got a lot of firepower, a lot of firepower. So before we get into the cases, let's go to Las Vegas, and we'll go to Caesar's Palace. We'll go to the roulette wheel here, and it's got 120 spaces, and we're going to put down one bet for each of Leonard's 119 crash retrieval witnesses. And you can kind of see here, we can't lose, basically. We're going to win almost every time. The odds are in our favor. It's 119 to 1 in our favor. We can't lose. All we need is one of these cases to be real, and the whole concept of UFO crash retrieval non-existence completely falls apart. So we're winning against the Air Force, and we haven't even started yet. All right, let's go on here. Now, isn't it wonderful, and isn't it lovely, and isn't it a privilege that in this country of ours, in our republic, we have something called the First Amendment, our right to free speech. We should never forget about that. And if we extrapolate to its furthest extent, what this actually means is, it means that the government doesn't own anything. We as taxpayers own everything. We own the aircraft, we own the hangars, we own the runways, we own the facilities, we pay for the employees, and we have every right to question authority. So this is something that we never want to forget. So let's go on to the UAP hearings, July 26, 2023. Off to the left, we've got Ryan Graves, Navy pilot, David Grush, U.S. Air Force Intel, David Fravor, Navy pilot, credible witnesses. Let's go on to what David Grush said, quote, I was informed of the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval program. Pretty historic, because this is the first time an official government employee had confirmed and verified that we do have a UFO crash retrieval program. Let's go on to Waterloo Record, July 27th, 2023. This just confirms that whistleblower David Grush acknowledges that we have a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval program. This is Waterloo Region Record, July 27th, 2023. I want to give credit to my good friend Rudy Gardea, who did all the original pencil sketches and refined drawings to make this whole thing come alive here. And we're going to start and kick it off with this case right here. This is Cape Girardeau, Missouri, April 26, 1941, 9:30 p.m. at night. This is page 240 in the book, so I want to give you the page number where you can verify all this in Leonard's publication. Now, if you look off to the left, this is the map, and star marks the spot of where this went down. Photo to the right is a photograph of Reverend William Hoffman. He received a telephone call from the police office at 9:30 p.m. at night, and they sent a car over to pick him up, but it wasn't a squad car. He got into the car, they drove across town, right to where I have the star on the left map here. He get out, it was around 10 p.m. at night at this time, and when he got out of the car, he was escorted into a large farmer's field. And when he got there, this is what it looked like. There was about a 25-foot diameter dish-shaped craft that augured in at a 40-degree angle. There was some burning embers in the background. There were newspaper photographers snapping photographs of the entire scene. Military just got on the scene at the time. There was police on the scene later on. The fire department was there. But then off to the left, you could see that there was a hull breach on the side of the craft revealing the internal components. There were swivel chairs there. There was buttons and switches there. Now, lying on the ground near the craft were 3 deceased ET bodies. They were 3.5 to 4 feet tall. Oversized head, oversized eyes, slit for a mouth, minute nose. They were all wearing a one-piece tight-fitting flight suit. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. This gives you another version of what this looked like. Now, 2 of them were already deceased. There was one survivor. One survivor. Let me go to the next slide here. Reverend William Hoffman got to this ET being within 60 seconds of him passing away. So he had like a minute to spare, but he did get to him while he was still alive. And he said that he expired within a matter of a minute of him getting to the scene. You could see the craft off to the background. There was a large hull breach on the side of the craft. We go on to the next slide here, and this is a illustration that shows you Reverend William Huffman looking inside the dome of the vehicle, which were seats, control panel, appeared to be flat screen monitors within the craft itself. And then you've got these newspaper photographers that were going around taking photographs with these speed graphic flashbulb cameras. There were other farm helpers that were pulled off to the side and were sworn to secrecy, never to talk about what they seen because the military had already arrived at the scene. And again, this is all documented by these newspaper photographers. Now, I want to mention that this important point, this is a special note. None of the bodies appear to be injured, damaged, or burnt. It was the assessment of General George C. Marshall, U.S. Army Air Chief of Staff, that the ETs died to decompression or their inability to breathe in our atmosphere. So it wasn't a blunt force trauma impact that killed them. They died apparently because they couldn't breathe our atmosphere. So that was a special point. Now, number two special note. The bodies appeared to be virtually identical to each other, like clones. It was as if they were manufactured in a machine shop factory using a punch press or cookie cutter style. That's what appeared to be the case. These were like clones. They were cookie cutter, like at a punch press. That's the impression from General George C. Marshall. Let's move on here. We want to ask the question, why didn't the aliens return for their fallen comrades to pick them up and rescue them? Was that because they were considered unnecessary and unneeded throwaways or clones? This is what we've heard multiple times, that you've got these crash retrievals where there's bodies there, and sometimes up to 16 of these. They never come to pick them up. Why? Are they throwaways? Are they clones? Are they unneeded? That appears to be what's going on here. All right, now, while all this is going on, the newspaper reporters are taking photographs of the debris, the body of the craft with these speed graphic cameras that I show you on the left with the big flash bulb. That's what they were taking photographs with. One of these photographers put down his speed graphic camera and he picked up one of these baby brownie cameras that you see here on the right. And he snapped a photograph of a very strange scene. There were two farmhands that picked up one of these deceased alien corpses and they supported it under its armpits, outstretched his arm, and this guy snapped a photograph of this thing. Just absolutely crazy. 2 weeks after this event took place, and we're going to get into what happens next here. 2 weeks after this happened, one of these photographers had a copy of that photograph and he handed it to Reverend William Huffman. Years later, who you see here on the left, this is Charlotte Mann. When she was 10 years old, she held this photograph. She saw this photograph. She examined it close. That photograph disappeared. It was lost to history. Now, what you see on the right is Charlotte Mann's reproduction, her rough sketch of what that photograph looked like. Now, I spent 4 years trying to figure out exactly the best way to replicate this. Now, I'm not saying I got it perfect, but something like this, I'm going to hit you with the replica here. Something like this was taken by a photographer back in 1941. And that photo was lost around 1953, but it depicted two farm personnel holding and supporting this ET being that was 3.5 to 4 feet tall, oversized head. They outstretched his arm and this guy took a shot of it. Now this thing would be decades old. It would be tattered and ripped and degraded, could be coffee stained. Something like this was photographed. Now, when Reverend William Huffman got to home this evening, he was a shaken man, for sure. He brought all the family around him, and he basically said the following: something happened to me this evening. I'm going to speak of it one time and one time only, and I'm never going to talk about it again. And that's exactly what he did. To his dying day, he never spoke about it again, but he laid it out all to his family, even though he was warned by the military not to talk about it. So he was a good reverend, but in this case, he had to break protocol, and he did tell his family. So where could you hide 3 extraterrestrial bodies and a circular craft or debris of unknown origin back in 1941? Well, a good place to hide it would be the Pentagon. It seemed to be a secure location. The problem is the Pentagon didn't exist back in 1941. So according to Paul Blake Smith, the body, debris, and craft was stored in an underground basement below the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. So I'm going to take you inside this basement and show you what this may have looked like. And according to Paul Blake Smith, in his book MO41, it was Secretary of State Cordor Hull who showed a minister wreckage, body, and debris inside this facility. So here we've got political figures. We've got the religious figure looking at the debris. This is 1941. This is at an underground facility at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. I'm going to go to a next version of it here. This is a more refined illustration, but something like this may be at the Capitol building as we speak right now. This is the reference for it. Paul Blake Smith did a great job. This is MO41. This is before Roswell. He did a great job. I want to give him credit. And of course, MUFON in November 2001 did a great article depicting and laying out the entire case. So this is Cape Girardeau, 1941. Columbia Daily Tribune, February 3rd, 2015. They did an article that also talks about this case as well in great detail. So now we want to move on here. We're not even at Roswell yet. This is 1942 at an Army base north of Georgia that even Leonard didn't know. This is page 319 in the book. The source is a civilian capacity key civilian. Crash measured 15 feet in diameter. It was 10 feet tall. It had 3 levels on it. There was a crew compartment with seats. There was a control panel area. And on the bottom, there was an open hatch. Now, written on the inside wall of the dome of the craft, there were hieroglyphic type markings. And then wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft, there were also hieroglyphic type markings written around the outside circumference. There were 4 crew members taken alive, and 1 was female. 5 feet tall, 90 pounds, large black eyes, milky white skin. Now, what Rudy's done here, he showed you this wraparound window that was also mentioned in the report. Here's a blow-up of these hieroglyphic type writings. No, there has to be a united coalition of linguistic experts and engineers trying to decipher and decode what these symbols mean. There has to be, absolutely has to be going on. So here's my full color rendering of what this may have looked like. You see there was a hull breach on the side of the craft because when this craft came down, it hit the side of the roof of the facility and ripped open a hull breach on the side of the craft. There was what looked like hieroglyphic type writing wrapped around the outer circumference. But now I want to take you inside the craft. Here is what was seen on the inside. According to the report, there were 4 seats there. There was writing on the inside wall. They were kind of a violet pastel color. Let's move on to the next slide here. Here is the control area. You know, this is the best that I could come up with based on the firsthand witness that was there and saw this. Let's move on here. Now, here's what the beings look like. And I'm going to go to the next slide here. This shows you the oversized head, the oversized eyes. We've got this 4-foot body. We've got the powdery white skin. Now, according to the report, they believe that one of these were female because it had breasts. And this is the second time I've heard this within the Stringfield cases. Some of these appear to be female, and I'm just remaining historically accurate here. Let's move on. Here's a blow-up of what the faces look like with these absolutely oversized eyes, slit for a mouth, minute nose, comes up multiple times. Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio, 1946. It had not become Wright-Patterson Air Force Base until the Army Corps of Engineers and Army Corps broke away as a separate entity of the military. So back in 46, it was still Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. This is 1946. And what you're looking at here is a period correct photograph of Hangar Complex 4, which has 5 bays, A, B, C, D, and E. I believe this took place inside Bay E. Our source is a 6-year-old boy named Tex Martin. This is page 242, 243 in the book. His father was also a part of this case as well. So we don't have to rely on the testimony of a 6-year-old boy. His father was there as well. Let me go on to the next slide here. Now, adjoining to the main hangar, there was a cafeteria. And there was a janitor who saw this 6-year-old boy, Tex Martin, seemed like a fine young man. And so the janitor asked the boy's father if he could buy him a soda pop. So we've got a period correct soda pop machine here. The father said, okay, it's all right. So he bought this 6-year-old boy a soda pop. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. And this is Rudy's drawing all roughed out. And the second he handed this boy a soda pop, this doorway opened up and a military personnel walked through the doorway. And now Tex Martin is looking inside this hangar. And what did he see? And this is all in roughed out format. He saw 2 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboy trucks with unknown tarp debris. He saw military personnel. He saw at least 1 U.S. Army Jeep. And then he said there was an off-white colored 18-foot diameter dish-shaped craft that had a ring wrapped around the outer circumference, and it was propped up on 3 tripod landing gear legs. And then he said that there were a minimum of 3 deceased ET bodies laying on the hangar floor. Let's go to the next slide. This is reversed viewing orientation. You can see Tex Martin in the back. He's looking inside the hangar. We've got the monuments laid out. We've got the tractor trailers. We've got the dish-shaped craft. We've got the bodies. Let me take you to the refined drawing now. This is Rudy's refined drawing. And this craft was about 20 feet in diameter. It had tripod landing gear legs. And what we want to do now is take this as a guide or a format to use as a template to do a full color rendering. So this was the very first pass of a full color rendering of this scene. I want to give Joel Christopher Payne credit. And you can see Tex Martin in the background. We've got the Jeep in place. We've got the tractor trailer, which is an M123. We've got the dish-shaped craft on tripod landing gear legs. Just a first pass. Now, I wanted to see if we could make this more realistic, make it come to life. Can we add more realism? So here is the second pass, kind of based on the full color illustration. We've got the craft in place. We've got the door open. We've got the military vehicles. Well, let's take it one step further. Let me go even one step further. And this shows you the tripod landing gear legs. We've got the ET bodies, the corpses in the foreground. We've got the craft, the trailers, but this is about as close as I can get based on the firsthand military witness in conjunction with Tex Martin. All right, now we want to ask the question, what did these men know about UFO crash retrievals? Dr. Edward Teller has always been alleged to be at the height of the UAP crash retrieval program, like running the show. Albert Einstein would have had a need to know. Robert Oppenheimer has been alleged to be involved in these operations, or at least in the analyzing of the craft themselves. Same location. So this is Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio, 1946. The source is a private. He worked in records management. The book is From Space: The Final Frontier, page 59 by Clark McClellan. So again, here's an overhead shot of Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio, 1946 timeframe. Here is the cover of the book. So I want to reference where I got this information. In the book, there is this sketch. This is a dish-shaped craft, 15 feet in diameter, 7 feet tall, highly polished mirror reflective exterior, no visible means of propulsion, basically no ailerons, no tail, no rudder, no fuselage. Wrapped around the outer circumference were these rectangular windows showing you the interior of the craft itself. Now, this craft came down, was loaded on a railroad flat car, and shipped to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So they shipped it all the way from Arkansas on a railroad flat car. This is my refined drawing that shows you on the upper right-hand corner. I've peeled back the skin showing you this 3-foot diameter central column that starts at the bottom of the craft, goes through the midpoint, terminates at the roof of the craft. Now, if you take a look at the window left of center, there's a red dot there. That is the attempted point of entry by these white lab coat technicians that were using an electric drill with a diamond tip drill bit. They were desperately trying to get into this craft. And I've got at least 2 other cases within the Stringfield collection that also highlight these diamond tip drill bits that are being used to try to get into these craft here. Here was the first pass kindergarten level full color illustration that I put together, just kind of a first pass of what this may have looked like back in 1946 timeframe. This is Joseph Race, much more refined illustration. Here you see on the upper right-hand corner, he's pulled back the skin, showing you this central column in the center of the craft itself. So here's Rudy's drawing. This private records management, he had to deliver a letter to a high-level military brass inside the facility. He was met by a friend who was a guard, and this guard said, you know what? I got something I want to show you. So he walked him back into the back of the hangar, and sitting on the hangar floor was this dish-shaped craft. He said that off to the right, there was a partially folded up tarp or canvas tarp. In the foreground, there was an open toolbox with a drill with an electric diamond tip drill bit within the drill. And he was at the right place at the right time to see all of this. Let me go with the next slide here. Here's my full color version that shows you what this may have looked like inside the hangar at Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio, back in 1946. And then this is Joseph Race full color rendering, just to give you an idea of what this may have looked like within that hangar. Now we want to move on to this letter here. Letter from Nathan Twining, Wright Field Air Force Base Commander, to Air Force Brigadier General George Shulgin. This is September 23rd, 1947. He says, quote, "The phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious." This is a guy with the need to know. He would definitely know about these operations. Within this letter, it talks about the form, fit, and function of these vehicles. It also describes the flight path characteristics of these vehicles. Next one, Papagos Indian Reservation, west of Globe, Arizona. This is January 1947. So we're still prior to Roswell here, and we're 2 and 3 in already. North of Superstition Mountains. Witness served in the U.S. Navy during World War II. So that's where we're getting the information. Page 93 in Leonard's book, Case A10. So here you've got Rudy's drawing. We've got the military personnel. They're driving on an unimproved road. We've got the Superstition Mountains. And these 2 people in the Jeep are challenged and stopped by military MPs with carbide rifles, telling them, you're not supposed to be here, vacate the area immediately. But it was already too late, because another 50 foot down this unimproved area, there was about a 30-foot diameter dish-shaped craft that augured in at a 40-degree angle, and they saw the beginning of this retrieval operation. It had a low-rise dome on top. There was what looked like indented windows wrapped around the outer circumference, and then 2 rings wrapped around the outer circumference. So they were at the exact right place at the right time and got to see the very beginning of this highly classified, restricted military retrieval operation. Here was the very first pass color illustration that we put together by Joel Christopher Payne. I want to give him credit. So we've got the military vehicles. We've got the military personnel. We've got the dish-shaped craft. Let me see if we can add some realism here. This was my first pass at a little bit more refined illustration. And let's see if we can take it one step further. And this was kind of like the final version of it here. But again, this is another one of these disc-shaped craft retrieval operations. White Sands Missile Range, July 4th, 1947. Our source is a technical sergeant, U.S. Army Air Force, page 196 in the book. Now, if you look at the map, the yellow version, the yellow section here is the perimeter of White Sands Missile Range. And this took place on the northern part of White Sands Missile Range within the yellow section on this map. And it took place at night. I'm going to go on to the next slide here. And what's depicted here is in Rudy's drawing is a 150-foot dish-shaped craft. The whole thing took place at night, and according to the first-hand military witness that was there, he said the whole thing was excruciatingly well lit up. They had searchlights, they had spotlights on it, they had light-alls shining down on the craft. They had people with Geiger counters walking around this, checking for radiation. They had medical personnel. They had people and photographers taking still photograph with cameras. Off to the right in Rudy's drawing, you see they had motion picture film cameras documenting this whole thing. Let me go on to the next slide here. Here was the first pass at a color illustration to get this documented. And let's go to the refined version now. Something like this came down on White Sands Missile Range, July 1947. Let me go to another version here. Again, you've got these spotlights. You've got different light-alls documenting all this. Now, let me hit you with one more version. This is about as close as I can get. This is as optimized as I can get. And the report said that it was absolutely well lit up. I mean, this was not, it was dark outside, yes. But when they had this thing all set up, it might have looked something like this. Now, here's the actionable item here. Since still photography and motion picture film was recorded of this event, senators and congressmen with the appropriate security clearances should track down and utilize this evidence for future public hearings. But there's a problem here, and everybody knows this problem. Number one is that a lot of these senators and congressmen that attend these congressional hearings, they don't have a need to know, and they don't have a high enough security clearance. So how can they dislodge something they've never been briefed on? That's this brick wall we're running into in these congressional hearings. All right, next one. UFO crash retrieval in 1947, seen of all places in a warehouse at Berkeley University. Our source is Albert Bruce Collins. We can name him. He's deceased. He was a metallurgical engineer. This is page 197 in the book. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. Here's Rudy's drawing. So he was at the right place at the right time at Berkeley University warehouse, where this 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboy truck backed into the warehouse at Berkeley. And he said there was a 30-foot long egg-shaped craft, 15 feet high. There was a literal crack. It looked like a cracked egg that went from the top of the craft all the way to the bottom. And he said on the interior forward section of the craft, there was a composite panel. In the very center of the craft, there was what looked like an egg yolk that was about 3 feet in diameter. Wrapped around this egg yolk was another composite panel that wrapped around the outer circumference of the exterior of the egg yolk. Now, off to the side on the bottom right-hand portion of this craft, there was a hull breach with debris and shrapnel sticking out, like there was an internal implosion. You move on to the next slide here. This was the first pass for a color illustration depicting the interior of this warehouse at Berkeley University. So here is my full color rendering based on Rudy's drawing, based on Joel Payne Christopher's full color illustration. Something like this went on at Berkeley back in 1947 timeframe. Here was my fully optimized version. I don't think I could push it any further than this, but something like this may even be here as we speak today at some type of facility at Berkeley University. All right, next one. Carrot Patch, south of Salinas, California, July, August 1947. Witnesses were two 19-year-old workers who were in a nearby field. This took place at night. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. Here is the drawing within the report. This is not a large craft, 9 feet in diameter, 4 feet tall. It had a flat top. There was a double row of indented what looked like windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. Now, I don't think that what we're interpreting as windows are in point of fact windows. They could be some type of sensor array. Let's move on to the next slide here. Now, within the report was this map. So essentially, X marks the spot. We know where this craft came down. If we could go back in time with this map back in 1947 timeframe, I could take you plus or minus 200 feet where this craft came down. And so off to the left here, you've got Monterey, and that gives you an idea of where this crash took place. Again, this is not a large craft, 9 feet in diameter, 4 feet tall. This was my first AutoCAD rendering just to kind of put some dimensions on this. And then this is Rudy's drawing. Now, according to the report, the foreman approached the two 19-year-old workers, and he alerted them to where this went. So the two 19-year-old workers, they kind of walk over, they went up to the craft. One of them got up enough confidence, and he kicked the side of it with his boot. Within a matter of 5 minutes, there was a convoy of military vehicles that arrived on the scene. So there was a Jeep, there was a covered 6x6 troop transport that was towing a trailer, and these 19-year-old workers were told to vacate the area, but they did see the military manhandle this craft, put it on the trailer, cover it with a tarp, put ropes over the tarp, and were out of the area quickly, very quickly. But they saw the entire retrieval operation. Let me go on to the next slide to show you a full color illustration that we came up with to preserve an important part of our national history. Let's take it one step further. Let's see if we can add some realism here. This is another version that I came up with just to kind of give an idea of what this retrieval operation looked like. And let me see if we can go even one step further. Something like this came down at Salinas, California, and was retrieved by the U.S. military. So how are we going to control the narrative and keep this massive life-altering secret from the American people and the world? That's kind of the big question here. How are we going to keep this a secret? Well, we are going to form a governing body of 12 military personnel that have intelligence backgrounds, military backgrounds, and we're going to control the narrative by using all these cover-up tactics, right? We're going to use threats. We're going to use humiliation. We're going to have buyouts. We're going to use disinformation. We're going to use reliable information released from unreliable sources, media manipulation, and censorship. This is one of the ways that this secret has been maintained all these decades by forming this control group. We can call them Majestic 12. Let's move on. Now, here's the $64 million question. Where are the top secret files on UFO crash retrievals being stored? According to one of Leonard Stringfield's military witnesses, they are kept in 3 large computer banks spread throughout the country. One is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Dayton, Ohio, which is no surprise to us in this field. We already knew that. Number 2 is CIA headquarters, Langley, Virginia. Number 3, NSA headquarters, Fort Meade, Maryland. Now, this witness from Stringfield left us with this interesting cryptic remark here. He says they will bend in any direction to keep them secret. And they have. They have done all those things that we talked about to keep this secret. So what would it look like in one of these government top secret facilities? Well, you'd have files, you'd have documents, you've had 8x10 black and white glossy photograph. In the background, you'd have motion picture film reels of these retrieval operations. And we know this to be true because of the great work by Frank Ficino, who tracked down all the documents regarding the early 1950s shoot them down cases where we had F-94 Starfires with the gun cameras rolling, trying to intercept these craft. None of those film reels have ever been seen, and there are hundreds of them. Let's move on here. Now, we talked about the files. Where are the ET craft and bodies being stored? We got the files now. Now we want to go after the craft and the bodies. NSA headquarters, Fort Meade, Maryland. MacDill Air Force Base, Temple, Florida. Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, Goldsboro, North Carolina. So you can see what they've done is, in the early 1940s, all roads led to Rome, but in this discussion, all roads lead to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And then in the late 1940s, getting into the 50s and 60s, they figured out, they were smart, that they had to diversify their portfolio, and they started moving these craft around to different locations because they didn't want to have a single point failure here. All right. C-119 flying boxcar, Sierra Madre Valley, Mexico, prior to 1951. I'm thinking 1948 timeframe. Our source is an engineer. He worked in highway construction. This is page 32 in the book. Now, I want to make mention that we know how big this craft was that they recovered. And we know that because of the interior wall thickness dimension of the C-119 flying boxcar. If you take a tape measure, it's 9 feet 10 inches wide. Therefore, by default, the craft can't be any more than 9 feet across because you will have to allow 5 inches of clearance on either side. It's a mathematical certainty. So here's Rudy's drawing. Now, this construction engineer, when the C-119 flying boxcar landed, they use an inclined plane to bring it into the back of the cargo bay. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. You can see now the retrieval operation is in full swing. Let's move on to the next one. This is a blow up. Now, they may have used some type of a trailer and a Jeep to bring this in. That's one possibility. The source also said that there were 3 deceased, burnt, humanoid-looking bodies. And he said that when he knelt down to touch their faces, the burnt skin came off on his fingers. So this was not for the faint of heart. This was a gruesome scene, to say the least. Now, we revisited this case to add more realism. I want to give Joseph Wraith credit for doing this. So I'm going to fly you around this crash site here. I'm going to move on. This is a 3/4 view looking down on the scene. And this is the aft view of the cargo bay of the C-119 opened up. This is an eye-level view here. You can see that the retrieval operation is in full swing. And then this is loading the craft into the back clamshell bay doors of the C-119. And then this is a top view looking down of the bodies here. We're going to move on. I think we've got time for a couple more here. This is Naval Air Station, Sunnyvale, California, 1950 at Hangar 1. Our source is a radar operator. This is case B5, page 57. Now, I want to make mention a couple things. This hangar is absolutely so large and so cavernous that it has its own weather inside. That's how huge this is. Now, when this radar operator went through 2 double doors, he got into this hangar facility. He said he saw a large 100-foot diameter dish-shaped craft with a low-rise dome on top. It had a series of circular windows wrapped around the outer circumference. He was ushered out of the facility in less than 60 seconds by a military guard telling him, "You're not supposed to be in here." Later that evening, he called his mother and he said, quote, when he described the craft, "It was certainly no aircraft of ours." That was his assessment. Let me go on to the next slide here. This shows you what this craft may have looked like back in 1950 at Hangar 1, which still exists today. You can get inside this hangar. Here's my refined illustration just to give you an idea of what this may have looked like here. Now, we've got a really good source for this next case. And our source is John Schuessler, basically the founding forefather of MUFON. His father knew someone who worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base back in 1952. And this source was kind of a gate guard, and everything that came into the base had to go through this gentleman. He had to look at materials manifest, bill of material, and he said that one night back in 1952, there was a military convoy of vehicles that was passing through the gate, and he said that there was a trailer with a dish-shaped craft covered by a tarp, and he also knew of crates that contained deceased ET bodies. And this is page 10, abstract 3. So I wanted to do kind of a full color rendering just to kind of make that case come alive. And this is what I kind of came up with here. So in this presentation, what I wanted to do is give you just kind of a brief overview of some of the mission critical UFO crash retrieval cases from Leonard Stringfield's firsthand military witnesses. And then through the use of drawings, sketches, and illustrations, I wanted to make these cases come alive. And also wanted to mention that everything that we covered here today and a whole lot more is now being fully integrated into a documentary with the latest drawings, illustrations, sketches, and then the videos that go with the cases to make these cases come alive. And I want to thank everyone for allowing me to be with you today.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you.
Yep.
Mike, go ahead. I'll let you take over.
All right, yeah, no worries. Michael, if you want to maybe unshare your screen,
Yeah,
we can,
unshare.
that'd
Good.
be great.
Okay.
Um,
Stop share.
there's a couple of questions from the chat, and then we'll open it up to folks who
Yep.
want to ask directly. But Jim is asking, sort of near the end when you were talking about that big cavernous building, he's
Right.
saying, is this the building Ross Coulthart refers to as that has been built to hide a craft? And I was
No,
actually
that's
thinking the
something
same thing.
completely different. Completely.
Okay.
This used to be a U.S. Navy blimp hangar before World War II, essentially. This was something that has been around for a long time. So this has nothing to do with the large one that was where something was built over it. That's a different thing altogether.
Okay. Do you have any intel on that by chance or no?
Somewhere in Asia. I don't know the specific location.
Really?
It's been talked about before, but and there might be more than one where they actually had to build something over it. There might be more than one.